it's Michael Caputo. Thanks for watching. This is the, kind of semi-regular weekly video that comes along with my podcast at stillstandingpodcast.com. Another week of waiting for Godot, waiting for the Mueller report. Pretty funny stuff, actually. This week I had 3 reporters on Thursday call me before 8 o'clock in the morning, and then 10 of them before 10:30, telling me today is the day for the Mueller report, but it wasn't, and it never has been. And every single day they predict it, and every single day they're wrong. Eventually they'll be right. I guess that's the game they're playing. If you predict the report is coming out today, you can at least say you were right that time. Like a broken clock, you're right twice a day, right? But I also was really struck by a report that came out of the Federalist today, at thefederalist.com. I keep referring to thefederalist.com over and over again in my videos and in my podcast. I've become real fond of it, and they had a story in there by Paul Sperry, a rather controversial investigative journalist, but somebody whose information he's pretty solid. And if he's at thefederalist.com, I think he's a reputable character. His story was about Dan Jones, somebody that I know a bit about. Dan Jones was a former Senate Intelligence Committee staffer, worked for Dianne Feinstein. Before that, he was a FBI analyst. And, I knew about him before the Senate Intelligence Committee called me up to testify on May 1st, 2018. I knew that Dan Jones is a private sector guy now. He left the Intelligence Committee when Dianne Feinstein did, and to become chairman of, I guess, Senate Judiciary. Ranking member of Senate Judiciary. He went into the private sector and started a couple of different curious private companies. One of them in particular is called the Democracy Integrity Project. Democracy Integrity Project. Related to a couple of other firms of his. And what he's doing with the Democracy Integrity Project is what I brought up to the Senate Intelligence Committee in May of 2018. Dan Jones has raised money, over $10 million as far as I know. There were reports that he raised about $50 million, but it looks like he might have scaled back that estimate. Raised money from people like George Soros. It's a fact, not some kind of anti-Semitic remark. It's a fact. George Soros gave him money, as well as Tom Steyer, this guy who's behind the Trump impeachment effort. And Meathead, Rob Reiner from Hollywood, Meathead on All in the Family, gave a bunch of money. Others, well over $10 million in order to pay Glenn Simpson and continue the work of Fusion GPS, the work with Christopher Steele, the British spy that put together the Russian dossier, the bogus Russian dossier, what Carter Page calls the dodgy dossier, the dossier that was the basis for FISA warrants on Carter and others, and the renewal of those FISA warrants. And it looks to me like the FBI intentionally misled the FISA court in order, about the origins of the Russian dossier. It was paid for initially by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. When the election was over, Dan Jones took over. Dan Jones raised private money. Instead of using Hillary campaign money and DNC money, washed through a law firm in Washington, like they did during the campaign, Dan Jones took it over and started expanding the work of Fusion GPS to put more information in the bogus Russian dossier and to spin those little intelligence briefs, as they called them, in order to legitimize them. Spin those out to reporters in Washington. But Dan Jones has taken it a little bit further, actually. Dan Jones and his group, the Democracy Integrity Project, that is about as much of a misnomer as I've ever seen, I've ever heard. He puts out a daily, 5 days a week, email, a research brief that puts out there all the bogus Trump-Russia stories, and tries to keep pushing that narrative that somehow or another we colluded with the Russian government. All the false stuff about Trump misbehaving in some Russian hotel, Michael Cohen, the liar, going to Prague. One thing after another has been disproven from this dossier, and yet Dan Jones, after the election was over, after it was used even into 2017 to renew the FISA warrants, he's continued to expand that dossier in cahoots with Glenn Simpson, the former Wall Street Journal reporter. And this daily research briefing, according to Sperry's article in The Federalist, is going out to reporters and committee investigators on the Democratic Party. Now, that's what I was upset about when I first caught wind of this thing on May 1st of 2018. I testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and in the midst of my testimony, behind closed doors, in a classified setting, somebody on the Republican side asked me if I knew anything about Dan Jones. I said, well, I do, and I'd like to address that in my closing statement. So we moved on to other topics. They looked at each other kind of curiously, the Democrats and the Republicans at the Senate Intelligence Committee. By the way, they wouldn't identify themselves, what their names were, or what parties they were from, or what senators they worked for. They just questioned me namelessly. But they were interested to hear what I had to say about Dan Jones. And in my closing statement, I accused some of you who are in this room, in the Senate Intelligence Committee brief, hearing that I testified before, of going to Dan Jones for information for him to help them write questions to ask me. I said, if you're working with Dan Jones, God damn you all to hell. I blame Dan Jones for a lot of what's gone wrong in this whole Russia collusion delusion. Dan Jones has continued to move out this information, to spread it around Washington, and he continues to give it to Democrat investigators in the House and in the Senate. That's a fact. And I'm telling you that the House investigators at the Judiciary Committee, where Chairman Nadler has made it clear he intends to continue the Russia investigation, and Chairman Schiff, the new Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, their staff investigators are getting this email and devouring it every single day in order to write their questions that they're going to ask people, Trump associates, who will testify before their committees. Now, Chairman Nadler has put out a document request to 81 people, including me. My lawyer and I responded immediately. I'm in compliance with the request. I responded that the documents that they wanted, a very short list of 3 items, I don't have them. They asked me about the Trump Tower meeting. I was in Cleveland at the time, didn't know anything about it. They asked me about any Russian government or Russian government intermediaries having any contact with the Trump campaign, any documents I might have about that. Don't know anything about any bullshit reference to that kind of collusion. Didn't happen. And whether I had any documents referring to or having anything to do with Rick Gates and Paul Manafort interacting with 2 Russians and a Ukrainian, didn't have anything to do with that either. So my answer from my attorney was, Michael doesn't have any of these documents. I was the first one to respond, in fact, and I'm completely in compliance with the House Judiciary Committee. But my attorney, Dennis Vacco, who was New York State Attorney General, former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of New York, told them, after the lead counsel at the committee asked him, will you present Michael Caputo for questioning? My attorney said, listen, he's testified under oath 3 times, answered the same questions over and over again, truthfully, 3 times under oath, and there's no reason for him to come again. In fact, if you want his testimony under oath, get it from the House Intelligence Committee. Get it from the Mueller team. Whatever it takes, get it yourself. No need for us to go ahead and put it out there again. Well, we know that the House Judiciary Committee, after what they've done in the Senate and otherwise, they're going to get their questions from Dan Jones. In fact, Dan Jones continues to circulate that stuff every single day. Today, right now, he circulated one this morning. And the fact of the matter is, Dan Jones knows that a lot of those stories are false. And if you look at U.S. Code, 18 U.S. Code 2384, if people work together using false information in order to destroy the government of the United States, that's called sedition. And if you ask me, Dan Jones, Glenn Simpson, the whole Fusion GPS cabal should be investigated under 18 U.S.C. 2384. Absolutely. You should look this up, thefederalist.com, a great story by Paul Sperry, and there's going to be more and more on this. Dan Jones, Glenn Simpson, if you're watching, I hope they come after you. I have no delusions or illusions that the Department of Justice will come after you, because we don't really have a justice system. We have a legal system, and there are two tiers. You're on the right one. I'm on the wrong one, Dan. But if there's any justice in this world, you will be investigated for sedition, for what you've done and what you're doing today. What is it? The Democracy Integrity Project. How ridiculous is that? Dan Jones, if you see his photo, he's a scumbag. There's no question. And I talked about it last night on Tucker Carlson. Here it is.
Michael Caputo is a former Trump campaign advisor, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Caputo, if this report comes back, whenever it comes back, and shows or doesn't show collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, you will be owed an apology, no?
I think so, but there's no office of, return of your reputation in the United States Capitol, and certainly not at the offices of MSNBC. Tucker, you look back, if you're caught in this jackpot like I am, and like Carter Page is, and J.D. Gordon and others who are mere witnesses and who have been ruined anyway, whose careers have been completely destroyed, whose families have been completely destroyed as marginal witnesses, you understand that there are real key players in the bowels of this thing. Like, for example, you talk about Brennan, you talk about these other players in front of everyone. We have players like Dan Jones. You know about Dan Jones. The Federalist published a great story by investigative journalist Paul Sperry. He's a guy I talked about in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee almost a year ago. This guy was a Senate Intelligence Committee staffer, a former FBI analyst, and he today has raised $10 million to continue the work of Fusion GPS. He's working closely with Glenn Simpson today, with Christopher Steele, the former British spy who Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid. He's working with him today, and he puts out a daily email to reporters and Democratic committee staffers on the Hill, still peddling the Russia collusion hoax, still peddling stories that have been completely disproven, and he's still getting hits in the media even today.
Any idea who's paying for that? Who gave him the $10 million?
Yes, he has admitted that it's being paid for by George Soros, by Rob Reiner, meathead from All in the Family, by a foundation close to this Steyer character who's running this Impeach Trump Now deal. These guys have put up, I think it's almost over $10 million right now. And by the way, while my family and J.D. Gordon's family and Carter Page's family and dozens of other families related to the Trump kind of orbit have gone completely bust due to this bogus Russia investigation, Dan Jones and Glenn Simpson and Christopher Steele, they're getting rich beyond their wildest dreams. And here's the thing, Tucker. I know you believe and others believe that there's nothing criminal going on here, but I disagree. All you got to do is look up 18 U.S.C. 2384 and apply that to Dan Jones. If we don't have some kind of investigation into Dan Jones, Christopher Steele, and Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, and if we find a crime related to 18 U.S.C. 2384 sedition, then we have no country. We have no rule of law.
Well, at the very least, we're learning who has real power in this country, and it's not this administration.
No doubt. No
obviously.
doubt. Well, there it is, my appearance on Tucker Carlson Thursday night. Dan Jones, Glenn Simpson, even Christopher Steele. You guys deserve a speculum right up your asses. As far as I'm concerned, you have committed sedition. And you have tried very hard to destroy my family by trying to destroy Donald Trump, his businesses, his family, his government. If there's any justice in this world, Dan Jones will see some investigators soon. So it's Michael Caputo for Still Standing. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget, check it out, stillstandingpodcast.com. That's where you find my weekly audio, a lot of videos, and even a little bit of blogging. stillstandingpodcast.com.